The rain in Palermo was a warm, mournful curtain, washing the ancient stones of the Piazza Pretoria in shades of gunmetal and ochre. Lauren Vital stood under the awning of a cafe, a macchiato cooling and forgotten before him. He was a man carved from silence and shadow, his presence a void that seemed to swallow the cheerful chaos of the Sicilian evening. At 35, he carried the weight of the Vital family empire with a weary grace, his dark eyes missing nothing, his handsome face a mask of impassive control. The call he was waiting for would dictate whether the night would end in business or bloodshed. His phone, a secure, encrypted device, vibrated on the wrought iron table. Not a call. A video. His lieutenant, a sharp-faced man named Tommaso, stood a discreet distance away, his hand drifting inside his jacket. Lorenzo tapped the screen. The video was dark, grainy. A single bare bulb swung from a low ceiling, casting dizzying shadows. In the center of the frame, tied to a wooden chair, was his 7-year-old son, Leo. His small face was pale and streaked with tears, but his jaw was set in a stubborn line that was pure Vital. A wave of cold, murderous fury so potent it turned his vision white washed over Lorenzo. He did not move. He did not make a sound. A figure moved into the frame, face obscured by a black balaclava. The voice that came through the speaker was distorted by a cheap modulator, grating and electronic. Vital, you have 12 hours, 10 million euros, untraceable crypto. You will be contacted with the coordinates, no police, no tricks, or you receive the boy in pieces. It was a standard script, amateurish even. But then, as the figure leaned closer to the camera, the modulator crackled, faltering for a fraction of a second. Beneath the electronic garble, for a single heart-stopping syllable, Lorenzo heard it, the true timbre of the voice. A voice that had once whispered his name in the dark, a voice that had haunted his dreams for a decade. Ilera. The world stopped. The rain, the piazza, the threat to his son, it all receded into a distant hum. The past rushed up to meet him, a sucker punch to the soul. Ilera. Her name was a ghost on his lips, a wound he thought had long since scarred over, now torn open and bleeding. He ended the call, his hand was perfectly steady, he looked at Tommaso. It's her. Tommaso's eyes widened in confusion. Sir. The kidnapper, it's Ilera. The name meant nothing to Tommaso. It was from a life before this one, a life Lorenzo had buried. Ilera. The woman who had loved him when he was just a university student named Lorenzo, the son of a shipping magnate, not the heir to a Mafia dynasty. The woman he had loved with a desperate, foolish passion. The woman he had been forced to abandon, cruelly and completely, the day his father was gunned down and the mantle of the Vital family was thrust upon him. He had broken her heart to save her life, believing the world he was entering would destroy her. He had vanished from her life without a word, leaving her only a shattered love and a mystery. And now, a decade later, she had re-emerged from the darkness to take from him the only thing he loved more than the memory of her. The cold fury crystallized into something sharper, more personal, more agonizing. This was not business. This was a reckoning. He stood, throwing a handful of euros onto the table. The macchiato was a dark, bitter stain. Cancel the transfer, we're not paying. But Don Vital, Leo. She won't hurt him, Lorenzo said, the certainty ironclad in his voice. He knew her. The woman he had loved was still in there, beneath the balaclava and the rage. This was a message for him. She wants me, this is personal. He walked into the rain, Tommaso scrambling to keep up. The gentle Sicilian evening was now a hunting ground. The game had changed. The ransom was not for money, it was for answers, for a confrontation a decade in the making. And as he slid into the back of the black sedan, his mind was no longer on the logistics of a rescue, but on the ghost who had returned to haunt him. The kidnapping was a crime, but the voice was a confession, and Lorenzo Vital was ready to hear it. The safe house was a nondescript apartment overlooking the bustling Vucceria market, the air thick with the smells of frying fish and salt. Inside, the mood was frigid. Lorenzo stood before a large monitor, the grainy freeze frame of the kidnapper looming. Tommaso and 2 other men, Enzo and Riccardo, worked furiously at laptops, tracing the signal, analyzing the video's metadata. The modulator is low-grade, Russian-made, Riccardo said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The dropout was a power fluctuation, a flaw, we got lucky. Luck had nothing to do with it, Lorenzo murmured, his eyes fixed on the blurred figure. He wasn't seeing a faceless criminal. He was seeing a young woman with hair the color of wheat in the sun and eyes the shade of a summer storm. Ilera, the art history student who dragged him to museums and laughed at his cynicism. The woman who had made him believe for one blissful, naive year that he could have a life outside the gilded cage of his name. "We have a location," Enzo announced, pointing to a map on another screen. A red dot pulsed in the rugged, green interior of the Madoni Mountains. An abandoned shepherd's pagheru, remote, defensible, it fits. Tommaso looked at Lorenzo. "The plan, Don Vital, we move in tonight, a full assault." Lorenzo didn't answer immediately. He was trapped between two timelines. The present, where his son was in danger, and the past, where he had destroyed the only good thing he'd ever had for himself. He remembered the last time he'd seen her. He'd taken her to their spot, a secluded cove outside the city. He'd been cold, distant, the weight of his father's coffin already crushing him. "It's over, Alara." "What, Lorenzo, what are you talking about?" Her face, so open and trusting, had crumpled. "You were a distraction, a pleasant one, but my life is elsewhere. It was never going to work." The lies had tasted like ash. He had seen the light in her stormy eyes extinguish, replaced by a devastation so complete it had physically pained him. He had turned and walked away, and he had never looked back. He had heard a single shattered sob before the sound of the waves swallowed it. He had done it to protect her, to keep her clean, away from the blood and betrayal that was his birthright. He had believed it was the only way. Now that decision had come back to claim his son. "No assault," Lorenzo said, his voice cutting through the tactical planning. "I'm going in alone." A stunned silence filled the room. Tommaso was the first to find his voice. "De Solo, that's suicide. We don't know how many are with her, what weapons they have." "She's alone," Lorenzo stated, with an absolute certainty that brooked no argument. "This isn't a professional job, it's personal. She's alone and she's waiting for me." He turned from the screen, his gaze sweeping over his men. "You will secure the perimeter. No one gets in or out unless I give the order, but this is between her and me." He walked to a heavy chest in the corner and unlocked it. Inside, nestled in foam, lay a pair of sleek black pistols. He ignored them. Instead, he picked up a small, wicked-looking knife and strapped the sheath to his ankle. Then he reached for a smaller, older object tucked into a velvet pouch. It was a woman's hairpin, a simple, elegant twist of silver. He had bought it for her from a street vendor the day he told her he loved her for the first time. He had kept it, a secret, shameful relic of the man he could have been. He slipped the pin into his pocket. It was not a weapon, it was a key to a door he had locked 10 years ago. An hour later, he was behind the wheel of a rugged Land Rover, navigating the winding, dark roads into the mountains. The rain had lessened to a fine mist, shrouding the peaks in ghostly gray. His mind was not on the mission, but on the past. On the taste of her lips, the sound of her laughter, the way she would trace the lines of his palm and tell him his future was not written in the scars there. He had been a fool. He had thought he was saving her by pushing her away. But he had only created a different kind of monster, a woman forged in the crucible of heartbreak who had now learned to wield a weapon. She hadn't taken Leo for money. She had taken him to force a confrontation. To ask the question that had haunted her for a decade: why? The tires crunched on gravel as he killed the engine a kilometer from the location. He would approach on foot. The night was alive with the chirping of crickets and the drip of water from the leaves. He moved like a part of the darkness itself, a predator returning to the scene of a long-ago crime. He was not going to rescue his son from a kidnapper. He was going to face the ghost of his first and only love, and he had no idea which of them would survive the encounter. The Pagharu was exactly as the satellite image had shown, a low, circular stone hut, its conical roof sagging with age, nestled in a small, rocky clearing surrounded by dense oak forest. A faint golden glow flickered from a single window, a lone beacon in the vast, dark wilderness. No guards were visible, no tripwires, just the profound, watchful silence of the mountains. She was confident, or she wanted to be found. Lorenzo approached from downwind, his movements fluid and silent, a shadow among shadows. He could hear the crackle of a fire from inside and a low, murmuring voice. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, traitorous rhythm. He circled the hut, finding the heavy wooden door slightly ajar, an invitation. He didn't burst in. He pushed the door open slowly, the old hinges groaning a soft protest. The scene inside was surreal, a painting torn from two different centuries. Leo was sitting on a pile of old blankets near a small, efficient-looking camping stove, not a fire. He was eating a piece of bread and cheese, his small face calm, though his eyes widened as he found his father in the doorway. He wasn't tied up. He was there. And then he saw her. She was standing with her back to him, staring into the blue flame of the stove. The black balaclava was gone. Her hair, shorter now, was pulled into a messy knot, but it was still the color of wheat, though dulled by time and hardship. She wore practical dark clothing, tactical pants, a black sweater. She was thinner, more rigid, the soft curves of the girl he remembered honed into the lean lines of a survivor. She didn't turn. "You're early, Lorenzo. I didn't expect you for another 3 hours." Her voice. It was her voice, the one from the memory, but stripped of its warmth. It was flat, cool, the voice of a stranger who knew him intimately. He stepped fully inside, letting the door swing shut behind him. His eyes never left her. Alara. Finally she turned, and the air left his lungs. Time had been both cruel and kind. There were fine lines at the corners of her storm-gray eyes, a hardness to her mouth that hadn't been there before. But she was still, undeniably, the woman who had shattered his heart so he could become the man he was. Her gaze was a physical weight, filled with a decade's worth of stored-up bitterness and a pain so deep it seemed bottomless. "Papa," Leo's small voice cut through the tension. "It's all right, Leo," Lorenzo said, his voice remarkably steady. He kept his eyes on Alara. "Are you hurt?" The boy shook his head. "She gave me food. She said you were coming." Alara's lips twisted into a faint, bitter smile. "See, I'm not a monster, despite what you must think." "Why Alara?" The question was torn from him, raw and unvarnished. "Why him? Why this?" Her composure cracked just for a second. A flash of the old, wounded girl surfaced in her eyes. "You took everything from me, Lorenzo. You didn't just leave, you obliterated me. You made me question my own reality, my own worth. For 10 years I've wondered what I did wrong. What was so wrong with me that you could erase me?" She took a step toward him, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I tried to find you your father's shipping business." She spat the words. "It didn't take long to figure it out, the great Don Vital. I couldn't get to you. Your world is a fortress, but him," her gaze flicked to Leo. "Him I could reach. I knew it was the only way you would ever really look at me again. The only way I could get you alone was to ask you, why?" Lorenzo felt the weight of his sins, heavy and suffocating. He had done this. His noble, stupid sacrifice had not saved her. It had twisted her, driven her to this desperate, dangerous act. "It wasn't you," he said, his voice low, throbbing with an emotion he had suppressed for a decade. "It was never you, it was me, my life, my name. My father was murdered, Alara. I wasn't just the heir to a fortune, I was the heir to a war. If I had stayed with you, they would have used you to get to me. They would have killed you or worse. I pushed you away to save you." He saw the words land, saw her process them. The anger in her eyes didn't dissipate, but it was now mingled with a dawning, horrified understanding. You let me believe I meant nothing," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You let me hate you." "It was better than you being dead," he said, the truth finally free after all these years. It hung in the smoky air of the hut, a simple, brutal confession. In that moment, the standoff shifted. The kidnapper and the victim were gone. In their place were two ghosts, staring at each other across the ruins of a love that had been sacrificed on the altar of a legacy neither of them had chosen. The ransom was forgotten. The only thing left was the devastating, life-altering truth. The silence in the hut was thicker than the stone walls. Leo, sensing the shift in the adults, had stopped chewing and was watching them with wide, curious eyes. The confrontation Lorenzo had prepared for, a violent extraction, a negotiation at gunpoint, had evaporated, leaving behind the raw, emotional wreckage of their past. Alara stared at him, the hard shell she had built around herself visibly fracturing. The confession had not brought relief, it had unleashed a torrent of conflicting emotions. A decade of hatred built on a foundation of lies was collapsing in on itself. "You had no right," she finally said, her voice a strained whisper. "You had no right to make that choice for me, to decide that a life without you was better than any risk. You broke me, Lorenzo. You didn't save me." He had no defense. He could only stand there and accept the truth of her words. His protection had been a form of violence. "I know," he murmured, the words inadequate, hollow. "I was young and arrogant. I thought I was being strong. I was being a coward." He took a cautious step forward, then another, until he was close enough to see the faint gold flecks in her gray irises, to see the pulse beating wildly at the base of her throat. He could smell the faint scent of wood smoke and a hint of the jasmine soap she had always used. The familiarity was a fresh agony. "What have you been doing, Alara?" he asked, his voice soft. "All these years." A bitter, broken laugh escaped her. Surviving, drifting, I left Sicily, went to the mainland. I worked shit jobs, waited tables. I tried to forget you. I tried to forget this whole damned island. Her gaze was distant, lost in painful memories. I got good at being invisible. I'm getting close to people without them ever really seeing me. It's how I managed this. She gestured vaguely around the hut. It's how I learned to track your movements, to find the one vulnerability in your perfect, fortified life. She had become a ghost because of him, a skilled, desperate ghost. Papa, Leo's small voice piped up again, more insistent this time. Is she the lady from the picture? Lorenzo froze, Alara's eyes snapped to his, a new sharp question in them. What picture? She asked. Lorenzo felt a fresh wave of exposure. He never spoke of her. But he had kept one photograph, a single hidden indulgence he couldn't bring himself to destroy. It was tucked into a book of Sicilian poetry in his private library. Leo, with a child's innocent curiosity, must have found it. It's nothing, Leo, Lorenzo said, but it was too late. The one where you're both laughing, Leo continued, oblivious to the tension, by the water. Alara's breath hitched. She remembered that day. A photographer, a friend, had caught them by surprise. It was one of the last happy days before the end. Lorenzo's carefully constructed walls were crumbling completely. He had not only kept her memory alive, he had preserved it as a secret treasure he hid from the world, but had shown it, unintentionally, to his son. The dynamic in the room shifted once more. The vengeful kidnapper was gone. In her place was a woman confronted with undeniable proof that the man who had shattered her had never, in fact, let her go. The anger was still there, a hot coal in her chest, but it was now smothered by a bewildering, painful sense of connection. Lorenzo saw the change in her. He saw the confusion, the softening around her eyes. He took the final step, closing the distance between them. He didn't touch her. He stood before her, closer than they had been in 10 years. I have lived with the ghost of you every day, Alara, he confessed, his voice raw. Every decision I've made, every breath I've taken has been in the shadow of what I did to you. Taking Leo, it's a sin I can understand. It's a sin I probably deserve. He glanced at his son, then back at her, his gaze intense. But he is innocent. Let him go. Let Tommaso take him back to the car. And then you can do whatever you came here to do, to me. He was offering her a trade. His son's safety is his own. He was surrendering not to a kidnapper, but to the judgment of the woman whose life he had ruined. Alara looked from Lorenzo's tormented face to Leo's confused one. The weapon in her pocket felt suddenly heavy, grotesque. This wasn't the revenge she had imagined. This was a tragedy, and she was no longer sure which of them was the victim and which was the villain. The line had blurred into nothing. The silence stretched, taut as a wire. Alara's gaze was locked on Lorenzo, her chest rising and falling with shallow, rapid breaths. The fantasy of revenge, of making him feel a fraction of the pain she had endured, was crumbling in the face of his raw, unvarnished surrender. He wasn't fighting. He was accepting his punishment, and in doing so he completely disarmed her. She looked at Leo. The boy had his father's dark, serious eyes, but there was a softness to him, an innocence that Lorenzo had long since lost. She had used this child as a pawn, a weapon to bludgeon the man who had broken her. The shame of it was a hot, acidic wave burning through the last of her rage. Okay, she whispered, the word torn from a place of utter defeat. Lorenzo didn't move. Okay. Let him go. She couldn't look at him anymore. She turned her back, facing the cold stone wall of the hut, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Lorenzo didn't hesitate. He moved to Leo, kneeling before him. Leo, listen to me. Tommaso is outside. You're going to go with him. He'll take you back to the car. Everything is going to be fine. But Papa, what about you and the lady? Leo asked, his small brow furrowed with worry. I need to talk to the lady, grown-up talk. I'll be along soon, I promise. He pulled his son into a tight, fierce hug, his eyes closing as he breathed in the scent of his hair. When he let go, his expression was the impenetrable mask of Don Vito once more. He took out his phone, sent a single prearranged character, and within moments the door opened. Tommaso stood there, his face grim, his eyes scanning the interior of the hut, taking in Alara's turned back and Lorenzo's kneeling form. He didn't speak. He held out a hand to Leo. Go with Tommaso Pixaridu, Lorenzo said softly. Leo, after a final, uncertain glance at his father and the strange, sad lady, took Tommaso's hand and was led out into the night. The door closed, leaving Lorenzo and Alara in the hushed, fire-lit silence. The moment they were alone, the atmosphere changed again. The pretext was gone, it was just them, the ghost and the king. Slowly, Alara turned around. The hardness was gone from her face, replaced by a weary, profound sorrow. The gun felt like a lead weight in her pocket. She reached in and pulled it out, a small, black semi-automatic. She held it loosely, not pointing it at him, but the threat was implicit. Lorenzo didn't flinch, he remained kneeling, looking up at her. "Is that what you need, Alara?" he asked, his voice calm. "Will that finally balance the scales?" Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over and tracing clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. "I thought it would," she choked out. "For 10 years I dreamed of this, of making you pay, but now I feel sick." "Then put it down," he said, his voice low and compelling. "Talk to me." Her hand trembled, the gun wavered. "Why did you keep the picture?" The question was a plea. "Because it was the last time I was thrilled," he answered without hesitation. "Because it was the only proof I had that the man I was before, that he existed, that he was capable of feeling something real." He rose to his feet slowly, a predator careful not to startle his prey. "Because I loved you, Alara, I never stopped." The admission shattered her completely. A sob racked her body. The gun clattered to the stone floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the small space. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. He was there in an instant. He didn't try to hold her, not yet. He stood before her, his presence a solid, steady anchor in her storm. "I destroyed us both, didn't I?" he murmured, his own voice thick with emotion. She lowered her hands, her face ravaged by grief. "You made a choice, and I made myself into this person I don't even recognize." She gestured to the gun on the floor. "I became the monster you were trying to protect me from." He reached out then, his fingers gently brushing a tear from her cheek. The contact was electric, a jolt of memory and sensation so potent it stole her breath. "No," he whispered. "You survived. You are stronger than I ever gave you credit for. I was the monster. I am the monster." His thumb traced the line of her jaw, a gesture from a lifetime ago. Her eyes fluttered, closed. The past and the present collided, the decade of bitterness and pain dissolving in the heat of that single, tender touch. The ransom was forgotten. The kidnapping was a nightmare fading in the dawn. All that was left was the devastating, impossible truth. They were still here. And the love, though scarred and twisted, was not dead. It had simply been waiting in the dark. The touch was a catalyst, breaking a dam that had held for a decade. A broken, wounded sound escaped Alara's throat, and she swayed forward. Lorenzo's arms closed around her, catching her as her legs gave way. He held her tightly, his face buried in her hair, his own body trembling with the force of emotions he had locked away for so long. They sank to their knees together on the cold stone floor, clinging to each other not as kidnapper and victim, but as two survivors of a shared shipwreck. She cried for the years lost, for the trust shattered, for the woman she had been forced to become. He held her through it all, his silence a profound apology, his embrace a shelter he had once denied them both. The gun lay forgotten a few feet away, a symbol of a revenge that had curdled into mutual grief. When her sobs finally subsided into ragged, hiccuping breaths, he gently pulled back, his hands cradling her face. Her eyes were swollen, her face blotchy, but in the flickering light from the camping stove, he saw the girl he had loved. The hardness had been washed away by tears, leaving behind a devastating vulnerability. "I'm sorry," he breathed, the words inadequate for the cataclysm he had caused. "I am so sorry, Alara, for everything." She shook her head, her hands coming up to cover his. "I became this person who could take a child, your child." The shame in her voice was a living thing. "Your reasons don't excuse what I did." "They don't," he agreed, his honesty brutal and necessary. "But I understand it. I drove you to it." He looked around the crude hut at the evidence of her desperate, lonely plan. "You've been living in the shadows because of me." He helped her to her feet, his arm staying firmly around her waist as if he feared she would vanish if he let go. He led her to the pile of blankets where Leo had been sitting and gently urged her to sit. He retrieved a bottle of water from his pack and handed it to her. The gestures were small, practical, but they were the first steps out of the abyss. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice hoarse. She took a sip of water, her hands still shaking. "Your men are outside. Tommaso, he'll want me dead for this." Tommaso does what I tell him, Lorenzo said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. The Don was back, but this time his authority was wielded to protect her. No one will touch you, I will deal with it. And then what? She pressed, her stormy eyes searching his. You take me back to Palermo, throw me in a cell, or just let me go to disappear again? The thought of returning to the emptiness now that she had seen him again felt like a death sentence. Lorenzo knelt before her, his gaze intense. No, I'm not letting you go, not again. The declaration was absolute. You're coming back with me. A flicker of the old defiance sparked in her eyes. As what, your prisoner? As my guest, he corrected, his voice softening. As the woman I should have never let go. We can't go back, Alara. We can't erase the last 10 years. What you did, what I did, it's a part of us now, a scar, but it doesn't have to be the end of the story. He was offering her something impossible, a second chance. Not to be the carefree students they once were, but to build something new from the ruins of their past. It was a terrifying, audacious prospect. Your son, she whispered, the guilt a fresh wave. He'll always know I'm the woman who took him. He will also know you're the woman I have loved his entire life, even when I didn't know where you were, Lorenzo countered. We will find a way together. The word hung in the air between them. Together. It was the very thing he had denied them a decade ago. It was the answer to the question that had driven her to this desperate act. Outside, the first hints of dawn were painting the sky a pale, watery gray. The long, terrible night was ending. The ransom call, the kidnapping, the confrontation, it had all been a violent, painful surgery lancing a festering wound. The poison was out. Now the healing could begin. Lorenzo reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, velvet pouch. He opened it and let the simple silver hairpin fall into his palm. Alara's breath caught. She recognized it instantly. You kept this, her voice was a whisper of disbelief. I told you, he said, his thumb stroking the cool metal. I never let you go. He leaned forward and, with a tenderness that made her heart ache, he gently tucked the pin into her messy hair. It was a reclamation, a promise. The door to the hut opened. Tommaso stood there, his expression unreadable. The boy is safe in the car, Don Vital. His eyes flicked to Alara, to the hairpin in her hair, to the gun on the floor. He said nothing. Lorenzo stood, pulling Alara up with him, his hand firmly clasping hers. He looked at Tommaso, his gaze clear and commanding. We're leaving. He led her out of the hut, into the cool, clean air of the new day. The nightmare was over. A different, more complicated reality was beginning. They walked towards the waiting vehicles, hand in hand, the Mafia boss and his former lover, stepping out of the shadows and into a future they would have to forge from forgiveness and the shattered pieces of their past. The return to Palermo was a journey into a new, uncertain world. They rode in silence, Lorenzo's Land Rover followed by a second car carrying Tommaso and a now sleeping Leo. Alara sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the landscape transforming from rugged mountains to the hazy coastal plain. The hairpin was a cool, reassuring weight in her hair. His confession was a seismic shift in her soul, but the reality of what came next was a chasm she couldn't yet see across. He didn't take her to the main Vidal compound, a place she knew was a fortress of loyalty and suspicion. Instead, they drove to a smaller, secluded villa on the outskirts of the city, perched on a cliff overlooking the Tyrrhenian Sea. It was beautiful, isolated, and felt like another, more elegant cage. As the heavy iron gates swung shut behind them, Alara felt a fresh wave of anxiety. This was his world, a world of high walls and higher stakes. Leah, woken by the stop, was quiet and withdrawn. When Lorenzo lifted him from the car, the boy buried his face in his father's neck, refusing to look at Alara. The sight was a knife to her heart. She had terrorized a child. No amount of understanding or shared history could erase that. A severe-looking older woman, introduced as Signora Rosa, the housekeeper, appeared and whisked Leo away to be fed and bathed, casting a deeply suspicious glance at Alara. They were left alone in a vast, sun-drenched living room, the French doors open to a terrace where the sound of the waves was a constant, rhythmic sigh. The opulence was staggering, a world away from the stone hut and her years of anonymous rooms. This is yours for as long as you need it, Lorenzo said, his voice echoing in the spacious room. You'll be safe here, no one will bother you. Safe from whom? Alara asked, turning to face him. From your enemies or from your friends? He didn't answer directly. Tommaso is loyal, but he is pragmatic. He sees you as a liability, a threat to my judgment. He will need to be managed. The rest of the family, they cannot know the truth. They will see only a stranger, a woman I have brought into our inner circle. They will not understand. So what is the story, Lorenzo? She asked, crossing her arms over her chest, a defensive gesture. Who am I to be? The long-lost love, the charity case, the prisoner in the villa by the sea? He moved toward her, his expression pained. You are Alara, that is all that matters to me. The rest, we will figure it out, but you have to trust me. Trust you? The words were out before she could stop them, laced with the old, bitter hurt. You have a history of making decisions for my own good without consulting me. How is this different? He flinched, the blow landing true. It's different because I am asking you to stay. I am not forcing you to leave. The choice is yours this time, Alara, always. He gestured toward the door. You can walk out that gate right now. I will have Tommaso drive you anywhere you want to go. You can disappear again. But I am asking you, I am begging you to stay. To give us a chance to fix what I broke. But I am asking you, I am begging you to stay. To provide us with a chance to fix what I broke. The offer was genuine. She could see it in his eyes. He was giving her an exit, a clean getaway. She could return to her life of shadows, to the numb safety of being no one. But the memory of his arms around her in the hut, the feel of the hairpin in her hair, the devastating truth of his decade of regret, it had changed the composition of her soul. Disappearing now wouldn't be an escape. It would be another kind of death. She looked past him through the open doors to the sparkling, endless sea. A life of freedom, but a life alone. Or a life here in this gilded cage with the man who was both her tormentor and her salvation, facing the suspicion of his family and the guilt of her own actions. I'll stay, she said, the words feeling both terrifying and right, but on one condition. Anything. I need to see Leo. I don't know, try to explain, to apologize. I can't live here with that between us. Lorenzo's gaze softened with a profound respect. He nodded. It will take time, but yes, we can try. He closed the distance between them and cupped her face, his touch so gentle it made her want to weep. Thank you, he whispered, and then he kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of promise. A seal on their fragile, impossible new beginning. As his lips met hers, Alara knew the most challenging part was yet to come. The kidnapping was over. The far more delicate and dangerous task of building a life from its ashes had just begun. She was no longer a ghost from his past. She was a complication in his present. And in the world of Don Lorenzo Vital, complications had a habit of getting people killed. The villa was a gilded limbo. Days bled into one another, marked by the sun's arc over the sea and the tense, unspoken rules of her new existence. Alara was a ghost in the machinery of Lorenzo's life. Signora Rosa brought her meals with a silent, disapproving efficiency. From her terrace she would sometimes see Lorenzo walking the grounds with Leo, their heads closed together, a portrait of a world she had violently intruded upon. The boy would never look up. Lorenzo came every evening. He was different here, away from the pressures of Palermo. The harsh lines of the dawn softened. He would bring her books, food she had loved as a student, and they would talk. Not about the past, not yet, but about inconsequential things, the books she was reading, the view from the terrace, the antics of the gulls. It was a careful, deliberate reconstruction of intimacy, brick by fragile brick. He was courting her not as a mafia boss, but as the man he might have been. One evening, he found her staring at a family photograph on the mantelpiece. Lorenz, a beautiful, dark-haired woman with a serene smile, and a toddler, Leo. A fresh, different kind of pain lanced through her. Her own history had so consumed her with him that she had almost forgotten he had built a life without her. Isabella, he said softly, coming to stand beside her. She died 2 years ago, cancer. Alara felt a pang of shameful relief, followed immediately by guilt. I'm sorry. It was a marriage of convenience, he continued, his gaze distant, arranged by the families to secure an alliance. She was a good woman, a kind mother to Leo. We had an understanding, respect, affection even, but it wasn't. He looked at her, his eyes full of a quiet intensity. It wasn't this. The electric, painful, all-consuming connection that still arced between them after all these years. The love that had been a wound for her and a secret burden for him. Does Leo remember her? Alara asked. He has her smile, Lorenzo said, a world of sorrow in the simple statement. He doesn't speak of her often, it's a different kind of loss, quieter. The conversation opened a new door. She began to see the complete picture of the man he had become, a widower, a father, a Don carrying the weight of a legacy he never wanted, all while haunted by the ghost of the woman he'd been forced to abandon. Her own pain, while real and valid, was no longer the only pain in the room. A few days later, he broached the subject she had been both dreading and craving. Leo would like to see you. Her heart leaped into her throat. He said that. In his own way, he asked about the sad lady from the mountains. Lorenzo's mouth quirked in a faint smile. He's a vital, he's resilient and curious. The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon in the villa's sun-drenched garden. Alara felt sick with nerves. She sat on a stone bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as Lorenzo led Leo out to her. The boy stood a few feet away, regarding her with his father's serious dark eyes. "Hello, Leo," Alara said, her voice trembling slightly. He didn't respond, he just stared. "Leo," Lorenzo prompted gently, "you had a question for Alara." The boy shuffled his feet, looking down at the gravel path. Then he looked up, his gaze direct and unsettlingly mature. "Why were you so sad?" The question, so simple and profound, shattered her. It wasn't an accusation. A child attempted to understand a world of adult misery. Tears filled Alara's eyes. She didn't try to hide them. "I was sad because I missed your papa for a very long time, and I did a terrible, terrifying thing because I was so sad. And I am so sorry that I frightened you, Leo. It was the worst thing I have ever done." Leo considered this, his head tilted. He looked at his father, then back at her. "Are you still sad?" She took a shaky breath. "A little, but being here, seeing you and your papa, it helps." He took a small, hesitant step forward. "Papa said you used to make him laugh." A sob caught in Alara's throat. She nodded, unable to speak. Leo took another step, then held out his hand. In his palm was a smooth, white sea stone. "I found this for you, it's for good luck." It was a child's peace offering, a forgiveness she knew she did not deserve, but which she accepted with a gratitude that felt like a physical ache. She reached out and took the stone, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you, Leo." He gave her a small, tentative smile, then turned and ran back to his father, the moment of gravity passing as quickly as it had come. Lorenzo watched him go, then looked at Alara. The expression on his face was so profound and hopeful that it stole her breath. The path forward would be long and arduous. Tommaso's suspicion, the family's judgment, her own lingering guilt, it all lay ahead. But in that moment, holding the smooth, lucky stone in her hand, Alara allowed herself to believe that a future here, in the wreckage of their past, might be possible. The ransom had been paid not in crypto, but in truth. And the kidnapping had ended not with a death, but with the fragile, terrifying beginnings of a family. The fragile piece of the villa was a bubble, and like all bubbles, it was destined to pop. The pressure came from the outside in the form of a summons. Tommaso arrived one morning, his expression grim, and handed Lorenzo a sealed envelope. The wax seal was imprinted with a stylized C, the crest of the Capello family, one of the oldest and most powerful of the 5 families' council. Lorenzo read the contents, his face hardening into the impassive mask of the dawn. He looked at Alara, who was watching from the terrace doorway. "There's a meeting, tonight. Old man Capello has called the council." Why, Alara asked, though she already knew. Her presence had not gone unnoticed. "Questions are being asked," Tommaso said, his gaze flicking to her with barely concealed animosity. "A woman appears from nowhere. She is installed in a private villa. The son of Don Vital was involved in an incident in the mountains that required a significant mobilization of our men. The other families are nervous. They smell weakness. They smell a distraction." "I am not a distraction," Alara said, her voice quiet but firm. Tommaso's lip curled. "You are a variable we did not account for. In our world, unaccounted variables get people killed." "Enough, Tommaso," Lorenzo cut in, his voice like chilled steel. He folded the letter. "I will attend, alone." "They will demand to know who she is," Tommaso pressed. "They will see her as a vulnerability, a lever to use against you. The story of the kidnapping cannot get out. It would make you look weak. The only other story is the truth that she is a ghost from your past, and that makes you look sentimental and reckless. No version of this ends well for her, Lorenzo." The unspoken threat hung in the air. The council could demand her removal permanently. Lorenzo turned to Alara. The decision was in his eyes. He could hide her, keep her locked away in the villa, a secret to be managed, or he could bring her into the light and face the consequences. "Get ready," he said to her. "You're coming with me." Tommaso looked as if he'd been struck. "Don Vital, but I am asking you, I am begging you to stay, to give me, to provide us with a chance to fix what I broke." "I will not hide her," Lorenzo stated, his tone final. "I hid her once. It destroyed us both. If she is to be in my life, the world will know, and the world will learn to accept it." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. He was choosing her, publicly and definitively, over the political stability of his position. It was the ultimate defiance of the code he lived by. It was also the most powerful declaration of love he could make. That evening she dressed in a simple, elegant black dress, her only jewelry the silver hairpin. When she walked out to meet Lorenzo, his eyes darkened with a mixture of pride and fierce possession. He didn't speak. He offered her his arm. The meeting was held in the basement of an ancient palazzo in the heart of Palermo, a windowless room that smelled of cigar smoke, old wine, and older power. 5 older men sat at a heavy, scarred table. Their eyes, sharp and merciless, tracked Alara as Lorenzo led her to an empty chair beside his. She felt like a lamb being led before a panel of wolves. Old man Capello, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and cunning, spoke first. "Lorenzo, you bring a guest to our council, an unknown. Explain." Lorenzo's posture was relaxed, but his energy was a contained storm. "This is Alara. She is under my protection. She is a part of my life. That is all you need to know." A man with a bulbous nose and cold eyes, Morty of the rival Morty clan, snorted. "A part of your life? We are not gossiping women, Vital. We have heard rumors of a woman, of a child taken to the mountains. You mobilize your men for a personal matter. You create instability. This, Alara, is a risk. A risk to you, and therefore a risk to the balance we have all worked to maintain." "The matter with my son is resolved," Lorenzo said, his voice dangerously calm. "It was a family issue. It has been handled." "And her?" Capello asked, his gaze boring into Alara. "How is she handled?" Alara felt the weight of their judgment, their suspicion. She saw the way they looked at her, not as a person but as a problem to be solved. She understood Tommaso's warning now. In this room, she was a commodity, and her value was measured solely by the trouble she could cause. Lorenzo leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. The gesture was subtle, but it silenced the room. "Let me be clear," he said, his voice low and resonant, filling the space. "Alara is not a subject for discussion. She is not a negotiation point. Any move against her, any attempt to question her place, any slight against her, I will consider a direct act of aggression against me and against the Vital family. And I will respond accordingly." The threat was delivered with such cold, absolute certainty that even the older men seemed to shrink back slightly. He was not asking for their approval. He was stating a new, unchangeable fact. He stood, pulling back Alara's chair. "This meeting is over." He took her arm and led her from the room, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. They had walked into the lion's den, and the lion had not just survived, he had redefined the territory. Outside, in the cool night air, Alara trembled as adrenaline crashed. "They hate me." Lorenzo stopped and turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "They fear what they don't understand, and they don't understand a man who would risk his power for a woman, but they will learn." He brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, his touch grounding her. "You are mine, Alara, and I protect what is mine." He had drawn a line in the sand for her. He had declared war on his entire world to keep her in it. As they drove away from the palazzo, Alara knew the cost of his love had just skyrocketed. The ransom for her heart was no longer just his past. It was his future, his power, his very legacy. And she was terrified that one day, the price would be too high for even him to pay. The declaration of war in the council chamber did not result in immediate violence, but in a cold, simmering siege. The villa, once a sanctuary, now felt like the front line. Tommaso's loyalty was strained to its breaking point. He followed orders, but the disapproval radiated from him like heat from a stone. The phone calls from Palermo became more frequent, more urgent. There were issues, a delayed shipment here, a sudden audit of a legitimate business there, minor, nagging cuts, designed to bleed Lorenzo's attention and resources. The message was clear: his focus was divided and his enemies were taking note. Lorenzo became a man stretched taut between two worlds. His days were spent in the city, putting out fires, reasserting his dominance with a cold, brutal efficiency that reminded everyone why he was Don. But his nights belonged to the villa, to Alara and Leo. He was trying to build a fortress of domesticity against the gathering storm, but the walls were made of sand. One evening he returned later than usual, the scent of cigar smoke and something darker, fear, perhaps clinging to his clothes. He found Alara on the terrace, wrapped in a shawl against the cool sea breeze. "It's getting worse, isn't it?" she asked, not looking at him. He came to stand beside her, leaning on the balustrade. He didn't lie. "They are testing me. Morty is making a play, sensing an opportunity. He's always been a vulture. And I'm the wound he's circling," she finished for him, the truth a bitter pill. He turned to her, his face etched with a fatigue that went deeper than physical exhaustion. "This is the life, Alara. This is the reality I tried to shield you from. It's a constant battle for territory, for respect. A single perceived weakness is a chink in the armor, and they will drive a spear through it." "So what do?" she whispered, the we feeling both natural and terrifying. "We stand our ground," he said, his jaw tight. "We show no fear," but he hesitated, a rare moment of uncertainty. "I may have to do things that you won't like to re-establish control." She heard the unspoken meaning. Violence, retribution, the language of his world. The language she had rejected when she took Leo, but which was now necessary to protect the very life they were trying to build. "I understand," she said, though she didn't, not really. How could she? He reached out and traced the line of her cheekbone, his touch a contrast to the harshness of his words. "I need you to be strong, stronger than you've ever been. The easy thing would be to send you away, to keep you safe in a cage somewhere. But I won't do that. I need you here with me. You are my strength, Alara, not my weakness." He was reframing the narrative. He was telling her and himself that she was not the cause of the turmoil but the key to weathering it. It was a desperate, beautiful lie, and she wanted to believe it desperately. The next day, the siege turned hot. Lorenzo was called away before dawn. A warehouse under vital control, a key logistics hub, had been firebombed. Morty's work, everyone knew. It was no longer a subtle cut, it was a declaration of open war. Alara spent the day in a state of suspended anxiety. Leo, sensing the tension, was clingy and quiet. In the afternoon, Signora Rosa brought her a small, wrapped package that had been delivered to the gate. There was no note. With a sense of dread, Alara opened it. Inside, nestled in blood-red velvet, was a single spent bullet cartridge. And a photograph. A recent one taken with a long lens. It was of her and Leo from 2 days ago, walking in the garden. A red circle was drawn around her head. The threat was no longer abstract. It was here in her hands. They weren't just targeting Lorenzo's businesses anymore. They were targeting her. They knew she was the linchpin. Remove her and Lorenzo would be destabilized, consumed by grief and rage, making him vulnerable. She didn't panic. A strange, cold calm settled over her. The fear was still there, a live wire in her gut, but a simmering anger now joined it. They thought she was the weak link, the sentimental indulgence, the woman who had needed a child as a ransom to get a man's attention. They were wrong. She was no longer the art student, nor the heartbroken drifter, nor even the desperate kidnapper. She was the woman Don Lorenzo Vital had gone to war for, and she would not be the reason he lost. When Lorenzo returned that night, his knuckles raw and a fresh cut over his eyebrow, she was waiting for him in the living room, the bullet cartridge and the photograph laid out on the coffee table. He stared at them, and the fury that contorted his face was primal, terrifying. "I will burn Morty's world to the ground for this." "No," Alara said, her voice steady. He looked at her, stunned. "What?" "This is what he wants. He wants you enraged. He wants you reckless. He wants you to come for him with everything you have so he can justify a full-scale war and rally the other families against you." She stood and walked to him, placing a hand on his chest over his pounding heart. "You told me I am your strength, so let me be that. Don't react the way he expects." He searched her face, seeing the newfound steel in her eyes. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we change the game," she said, a plan, audacious and dangerous, already forming in her mind. "He sees me as a target, so we make me a weapon." The kidnapped had become the strategist. The victim was ready to fight. The war for the Vital legacy was no longer just Lorenzo's to wage, it was theirs. The air in the study was thick with tension. Lorenzo, Tommaso, and Alara stood over a map of Palermo spread across the large oak desk. A wary, grudging respect had replaced Tommaso's initial hostility. The spent cartridge on the table had a way of focusing the mind. Morty's arrogance is his weakness, Alara said, her finger tracing a line on the map to a nightclub in the Calsa district. He sent this to scare me, to provoke you. He's celebrating tonight. He thinks he's won the first round. He'll be at his club, Il Toro, surrounded by his men, feeling invincible. Lorenzo watched her, a strange mix of pride and fear knotting in his chest. This was not the woman he had brought back from the mountains. This was someone new, forged in the fire of his world. So we hit the club, a show of force. No, Alara countered, her gaze sharp. That's what he expects. He's fortified there. We hit him where he feels safest, where his guard is down. She moved her finger to a different location, a modest-looking townhouse in a quiet residential neighborhood. His mistress, Gia. He visits her every Tuesday and Thursday night after the club closes. He goes alone. He thinks no one knows. Tommaso's eyebrows shot up. How do you know this? A faint, cold smile touched Alara's lips. The same way I learned to track Lorenzo. The same way I learned to be invisible. I listen, I watch, I find the cracks. She had spent her years in the shadows learning the art of survival. Now she was weaponizing those skills. He's vulnerable there, isolated. Lorenzo understood her plan immediately. It was brilliant and ruthless. It wasn't about a public massacre. It was about a private, psychological evisceration. We don't touch the woman, we don't touch the club. We take him to the one place he believes is his sanctuary. Exactly, Alara said. We take him quietly, and then we have a conversation. Tommaso looked from Alara to Lorenzo, a new light of calculation in his eyes. It's a risk if it goes wrong. It won't, Lorenzo said, his decision made. He looked at Alara. You've done your part, you stay here, Tommaso, and I will handle the rest. But Alara shook her head. No, I have to be there. Absolutely not, Lorenzo snapped, the Don's authority ringing in his voice. It's too dangerous. It's more dangerous if I'm not, she fired back, her own temper flaring. This is my plan, my intel. I need to see it through. I need him to see me. I need him to understand that the weakness he targeted is the reason he's lost. I am not a liability you need to lock away, Lorenzo. I am your partner. Start treating me like one. The word hung in the air. Partner. It was a demand, not a request. Tommaso looked away, wisely removing himself from the domestic battlefield. Lorenzo stared at her, the woman who had once been defined by her kindness, now standing before him, a general demanding her place on the field. He saw the fire in her stormy eyes, the unyielding set of her jaw. She was right. To exclude her was to infantilize her, to repeat the sin of his past by deciding what was best for her. He had promised her a choice. He gave a curt, reluctant nod. You come, but you do exactly as I say. You stay in the car until I have him secured. Is that clear? The victory in her eyes was a brighter, more potent thing than any kiss. Clear. Hours later, they were parked in the shadows down the street from the townhouse. The night was quiet, the only sound the distant hum of the city. Lorenzo and Tommaso were a study in focused lethality. Alara sat in the back of the car, her heart a frantic drum, but her hands were steady. Right on time, a black sedan pulled up. Morty got out, alone, slightly unsteady on his feet, a satisfied smirk on his face as he headed for the door. It was over in seconds. Two shadows detached from the darkness. A muffled grunt, a brief struggle, and Morty was bundled into the back of a van that had appeared as if from nowhere. The whole operation was silent, efficient, and terrifying. Lorenzo returned to the driver's seat. He didn't look at her. He started the car and pulled away. It's done. They drove to a secluded industrial unit on the docks. Inside, under the harsh glare of a single fluorescent light, Morty sat tied to a chair, his face a mask of fury and dawning fear. When Lorenzo walked in, followed by Alara, his eyes bulged with disbelief. You putana, he spat at her. Lorenzo moved with blinding speed, backhanding Morty across the face with a crack that echoed in the space. You will look at her when you speak, and you will show respect. Morty's head snapped back, a trickle of blood leaking from his lip. He stared at Alara, who met his gaze unflinchingly. "You thought you could use me to break him," she said, her voice calm and steady in the vast, cold room. "You were wrong, you just showed him what we're capable of together." She walked closer until she was standing right in front of him. "The bombing, the threats, it ends tonight. You will call your men, you will stand down, you will cede the 3 blocks around the port to Vital's control. And you will take your place back at the council table and tell the others that Don Vital's position is stronger than ever." Morty laughed, a ragged, desperate sound. "Or what, you'll kill me, start a war." Alara leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. "No, we'll tell your wife about Gia, and we'll tell your capos that you were taken so easily from your mistress's bed because you were too busy thinking with your dick to protect your own empire. How long do you think you'll last then?" The color drained from Morty's face. The public humiliation, the loss of respect from his own men, it was a fate worse than death. He looked from Alara's cold, determined face to Lorenzo's impassive one. He saw the new, unbreakable alliance. He saw his own end. He slumped in his chair, defeated. "I'll make the calls." As they walked out of the warehouse into the clean night air, Lorenzo looked at Alara. There was no triumph in his eyes, only a profound, solemn awe. She had not just helped him win a battle. She had transformed the war. She had proven that their love was not a vulnerability, but their most significant strategic advantage. He took her hand, his grip firm. "Partner," he said, the word a vow. She squeezed his hand in return. The ransom was paid. The kidnapping was avenged. The ghost was now a queen, and her reign had just begun. The resolution with Morty was not a victory parade, but a seismic shift in the bedrock of Sicilian power. The news spread through the underworld not with gunfire, but in hushed, incredulous whispers. Don Vital had not just crushed a rival, he had unveiled a new power beside him. The woman Alara was no longer a secret or a scandal. She was a factor. A strategic, ruthless, and utterly unpredictable factor. The bullet cartridge had been a declaration of war against her, and she had answered not with a plea but with a master stroke that left a seasoned Don broken and compliant. Life in the villa changed. Signora Rosa's suspicious glances were replaced with a deep, almost fearful respect. Tommaso's reports now included her, with his tone crisp and professional deference. She had earned her place not through love but through cold, hard efficacy. She had paid her dues in the currency of this world. Leo was the final frontier. The boy had watched the change in the adults around him with a child's perceptive silence. The sad lady was now a constant, calm presence. She didn't try to force affection. She was just there, reading in the garden, sometimes helping him with a jigsaw puzzle, her quiet steadiness a contrast to the tense energy that had previously surrounded her. One afternoon, he found her on the terrace, looking out at the sea, the lucky stone he had given her turning over and over in her hand. "Are you still sad?" he asked, repeating his question from the garden. Alara looked down at him. She didn't smile falsely. "Sometimes," she said honestly, "but less than before." "Because of Papa." "Because of both of you," she said. She knelt so she was at his eye level. "Leo, I know what I did was very wrong and very scary. I can't ever take that back. But I want you to know I would never, ever let anything bad happen to you or your Papa ever again. I will keep you safe." He considered this, his dark, serious eyes searching hers. Then he did something that shattered the last remaining wall around her heart. He stepped forward and wrapped his small arms around her neck in a brief, tight hug. "Okay," he mumbled into her shoulder before letting go and running off to find his ball. It was forgiveness. Not full, perhaps not complete, but it was a beginning. It was a foundation. As she watched him go, she felt the last of the kidnapper's guilt begin to loosen its grip, replaced by the fierce, protective love of a guardian. That night she found Lorenzo in his study, not working, but simply staring into the fire. The weight of the crown was heavy on him, but the constant wariness in his eyes had eased. "He hugged me," she said softly from the doorway. He turned, and the smile that spread across his face was one of pure, unadulterated joy, so rare and beautiful it made her breath catch. He held out his hand, and she went to him, letting him pull her onto his lap in the large leather chair. "He's a good judge of character," Lorenzo murmured, his lips against her temple. They sat in comfortable silence for a long while, the fire crackling, the burden of their past finally feeling like a story they had survived, not a chain that bound them. "It's over, isn't it?" she asked quietly, the immediate threat. "For now," he said, his arms tightening around her. "There will always be another Morty, another challenge. This is the life." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But it's a life I no longer have to face alone. You've given me back a part of myself I thought was gone forever, the part that can hope." He shifted her, reaching into the drawer of his desk. He pulled out a small, black velvet box. Her heart stuttered. "Lorenza." "It's not a ring," he said gently, seeing the panic in her eyes. A formal proposal, a binding into this world by law, was too much too soon. He understood. He opened the box. Inside, on a delicate silver chain, hung a pendant. It was not a diamond, but a polished, teardrop-shaped piece of obsidian, dark and depthless, shot through with a single fiery streak of red. It was beautiful, unique, and utterly them, born from darkness and violence, but containing a core of fierce, unyielding light. "It's a promise," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A promise that I will see you, not the girl you were, or the victim I created, or the weapon you became to survive. I see the woman you are now, my partner, my strength, my future." Tears streamed down Alara's face as he fastened the chain around her neck. The cool stone settled against her skin, a tangible weight of his love, his acceptance, his unwavering faith. She turned in his arms and kissed him, a kiss that was a seal on their hard-won peace, a testament to a love that had been to hell and back and had emerged, scarred but unbroken. Later, as they lay entwined in the quiet dark, the obsidian pendant a superb comfort between them, Alara knew this was not a fairy tale ending. There would be no happily ever after in the traditional sense. The shadow of the vital name would always be there. The phone could ring at any moment with a new crisis. But as she listened to the steady, strong beat of Lorenzo's heart and the distant, soothing rhythm of the sea, she knew something with absolute certainty. This was not a cage, it was a choice. And she had chosen him and he had chosen her, not despite their darkness, but because within it they had found a light that belonged only to them. The ransom call had been the beginning of the end of their old lives. And from the ashes they had built something new, something real, something that was worth any price. In the end, the truth hadn't saved them. It had forged them. And the bond they shared, tempered in betrayal and vengeance, was now stronger than any vow, any empire, any bullet.